Snowflakes drifted slowly past the window, dissolving into the icy darkness of the Moscow night. The city seemed frozen in time, hushed under the heavy weight of winter. Yet inside a cramped apartment on the 5th floor of a gray concrete block, silence was anything but peaceful. Within these walls, a quiet war was waged every evening, unseen, unspoken, but painfully real. A heavy thud rattled the doorframe as Alexei Petrov shoved it shut behind him. He didn't bother to take off his boots. The bitter wind that followed him in quickly died, but the coldness in his expression lingered. "Irina," he barked. Irina hurried out of the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour. She had been kneading dough for bread, the only small treat she could offer her daughter Tatiana after a long day. "You're home," she said softly. "Dinner is ready, I'll bring it to the table." But Alexei's face was clouded with frustration. His voice was sharp, echoing off the bare walls. "Dinner, dinner. Is that all you ever say? I break my back at the factory all day, and when I come home, what do I find? Silence, emptiness, nothing but this stale routine." Irina felt her chest tighten. She knew the signs. His tone, the way his shoulders stiffened, these were the moments that frightened her most. She glanced at the doorway where Tatiana, only 7 years old, was peeking out, her white eyes filled with fear. Irina gently motioned her back into the room, but it was too late. Alexei had noticed. "And you, always clinging to your mother like a shadow." He snapped at the child, his voice harsh enough to make Tatiana flinch. Irina instinctively moved forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter protectively. "Alexei, please," she whispered. "She's just a child. Don't." Her plea was cut off as he raised his hand in a frustrated gesture, not striking, but the motion alone made Tatiana press her face into her mother's chest. Irina tightened her embrace, lowering her head to shield the little girl. The room felt suffocating. The rattling pipes, the faint hum of the neighbor's radio, the dim lamp in the corner, all of it blurred as Irina fought back tears. She could not let Tatiana see her break. "Enough," Irina finally said, her voice trembling but firm. "This is not her fault. Whatever anger you carry from the factory, don't bring it here. Not to her." Alexei froze for a moment, his hand still in the air. His breathing was heavy, his jaw clenched. He looked at them, his wife holding their daughter, both shrinking away from him, and something in his expression shifted, if only for an instant. But pride and bitterness swallowed the hesitation. He muttered under his breath, turned away sharply, and stomped into the other room, slamming the door. The echo rang through the apartment. Tatiana began to sob softly. Irina stroked her daughter's hair, whispering, "Shish, my little one. It's all right. Mama's here. I won't let anything happen to you." Her own heart was breaking. She had once dreamed of a warm, simple life, a family built on love, not fear. But in the shadows of the Soviet Union, where survival was a daily battle and men were crushed beneath the weight of endless labor, those dreams had withered. Yet as she held Tatiana tighter, Irina made a silent promise. No matter how dark these walls became, she would protect her child. She would fight in silence if she had to. For Tatiana's sake. Snow blanketed the streets of Moscow in a heavy silence. Apartment blocks, uniform and gray, lined the avenues like watchful giants. Their cracked walls and dim stairwells were the backdrop to millions of hidden stories, of fear, of endurance, of love surviving in fragments. The snow had not stopped for 3 days. It gathered on rooftops, thickened in the alleys, and swallowed the city in a muffled stillness. Moscow looked beautiful from afar, white domes rising above frosted streets, but Irina Petrov knew the beauty was deceptive. For ordinary families like hers, life beneath the snow was not wonder, but struggle. The Petrov apartment sat in a concrete block that looked identical to dozens around it. The stairwell reeked of damp boots and old cabbage, the paint peeling from walls in tired strips. Inside, their 2 small rooms were furnished with a sagging couch, a table worn by years of use, and a narrow bed. On the wall hung a fading portrait of Lenin, a mandatory decoration, though no one in the house looked at it anymore. Irina moved quietly through the apartment, her slippers brushing against the floorboards. She had learned to live in silence, for silence kept the peace. Her husband Alexei had once been gentle, long ago, but years in the steel factory had stripped him down. His spirit seemed crushed beneath machines that roared endlessly, their smoke filling his lungs and their monotony filling his mind. At night, when he returned home, he carried that exhaustion like a curse. Sometimes it showed as weariness, a silence so deep it chilled the air. Other times, it erupted as anger, sharp, unpredictable, and frightening. That evening was one of the latter. Dinner, dinner, always dinner. Alexei's voice boomed as he paced the room. Do you think I live just to eat and sleep? Do you think this is life? Irina's hands trembled as she set a steaming pot of borscht on the table. She kept her eyes low, hoping the storm would pass quickly. Tatiana, their 7-year-old daughter, sat at the corner of the table with her crayons. She had drawn a house with a chimney, smoke curling like ribbons into the sky. A small figure of a girl stood by the door, holding her mother's hand. There was a man too, smiling, something rare in their real household. When Alexei noticed the drawing, he snatched it up. His voice was harsh. Paper. Do you know what it costs? Wasted on this childish fantasy. Tatiana's eyes filled with tears. But Papa, it's us, it's our home. The words struck Irina like a knife. She rushed forward, gathering Tatiana into her arms. Leave her, Alexei. She is just a child. But Alexei's pride was already wounded. He raised his hand, not to strike, but the gesture itself was enough. Tatiana buried her face against her mother, trembling. Irina tightened her embrace, shielding her daughter. For a brief instant, something flickered in Alexei's eyes. He froze, his hands suspended in the air, and in that pause Irina glimpsed the man he once had been, the man who had courted her with shy smiles and letters filled with dreams. But bitterness quickly crushed it. He muttered a curse, threw the crumpled paper aside, and stormed into the bedroom, the door slamming behind him. The silence afterward was deafening. Tatiana sobbed softly. Irina kissed her hair, whispering, "Shish, my love. Mama's here. I won't let anything happen to you." Her own heart ached, but she forced her voice to stay steady. Children needed certainty, not fear. She smoothed out the crumpled drawing, straightened its creases, and said, "See. It's still beautiful. One day, we'll have a home like this. Warm, safe, full of light." Tatiana sniffled. "Really, Mama?" Irina smiled through her tears. "Yes, my little bird. I promise." The weight of the union. Life outside the apartment was no easier. Irina queued for hours in the bitter cold for bread, sometimes only to return empty-handed. She traded whispers with other women in line, rumors of families who had been questioned by the KGB, of neighbors who had vanished overnight. Fear was the air they breathed, unspoken but omnipresent. At the factory, Alexei endured his own torments. Machines roared endlessly, drowning out thought. His superiors barked orders, the party demanded loyalty, and his fellow workers spoke only in guarded tones. He carried resentment home like soot clinging to his clothes. He loved his family in some hidden corner of himself, but the frustration that consumed him left no room for tenderness. Irina knew this, deep down. She knew he was more victim than villain. Yet knowing did not erase the fear. A small reprieve. One Saturday, when Alexei was called for an extra shift, Irina seized the chance to give Tatiana a taste of joy. She bundled her in a wool coat and led her to Gorky Park. Snow sparkled under a pale sun. Children laughed as they slid down icy slopes, their sleds scraping over packed snow. Tatiana's cheeks glowed pink with cold as she tugged her mother's hand. "Mama, look at them. Can I try?" Irina nodded, and soon Tatiana was flying down a hill on a borrowed sled, shrieking with laughter. For a moment, the gray world fell away, and there was only the sound of her daughter's joy. When they returned home, their noses red and their arms filled with small treasures, a few pine cones, a paper bird folded by another child, Irina felt lighter than she had in months. That evening, Alexei found them curled on the couch, whispering and giggling. He stopped in the doorway, silent. Something flickered in his expression, a memory, perhaps, of his own childhood. But it faded quickly. He muttered under his breath, sat heavily at the table, and the fragile warmth of the day vanished. Winter deepened. Rations grew smaller. Queues grew longer. Alexei's temper worsened. One night, Tatiana spilled her tea. The small cup toppled, staining the tablecloth. It was nothing, a child's accident, but Alexei erupted. "You can't do anything right," he roared, slamming his hand on the table so hard the dishes rattled. Tatiana whimpered, pressing against her mother. Irina's heart pounded, but this time something inside her snapped. She stood firm, her voice shaking but resolute. "No more, Alexei. If you cannot control yourself, you will not come near her." Her words hung in the air like shards of glass. Alexei froze, stunned by her defiance. His face twisted between rage and disbelief. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a curse, he grabbed his coat and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Irina stood trembling, but she did not let Tatiana see her fear. She knelt, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "Are we safe now, Mama?" Tatiana whispered. Irina kissed her forehead, her own tears finally falling. "One day, my darling. One day we will be." And in that moment, Irina made her silent vow. No matter how dark these walls became, no matter how heavy the silence, she would protect her child. Even if it meant standing alone. Inside one such apartment, the Petrov family lived a life that appeared ordinary from the outside. A husband, a wife, a little girl. But within their walls, love and fear wrestled daily. Alexei Petrov, once a promising engineering student, now labored long hours in a steel factory. His hands were rough, his back permanently bent from years of strain. The Soviet dream had swallowed his own ambitions, leaving behind a bitter, restless man. By the time he returned home, the weight of disappointment made him lash out at the only people near him, his wife, Irina, and their daughter, Tatiana. Irina, on the other hand, had learned to live in shadows. She spoke softly, moved carefully, and anticipated Alexei's moods the way one might read approaching storms. When the front door creaked open each evening, she braced herself, unsure whether she would face silence, weary resignation, or explosive anger. That night, it was anger. "Dinner, dinner. That's all I hear," Alexei snapped, tossing his hat onto the couch. "Do you think I work just to come home to this? To this emptiness?" Irina tightened her grip on the bowl she was holding. The steam from the soup fogged her glasses, but her eyes did not leave him. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago that arguing only added fuel to his rage. But then he noticed Tatiana. The little girl had been drawing quietly at the table, her crayons scattered across a piece of paper. She had sketched a simple picture of a house with smoke rising from the chimney, a woman smiling at the door, and a man holding a child's hand. When Alexei's shadow fell over her drawing, she froze. "What's this?" he demanded. "You waste paper on this nonsense. Do you know how expensive these things are?" He crumpled the paper in his fist. "Papa, please," Tatiana's voice broke. Irina rushed forward, her hands trembling as she took her daughter into her arms. "Enough, Alexei. She's a child. Let her dream." But his eyes were sharp, his jaw rigid. For a heartbeat, his hand twitched upward in a half-raised gesture. Tatiana buried her face against her mother, sobbing. Irina shielded her with her body, whispering soothing words even as her own fear grew. Alexei let his hand fall, muttered something under his breath, and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. The silence that followed was deafening. Tatiana clung to her mother. "Why is Papa always angry?" she asked between sobs. Irina kissed her forehead, fighting back her own tears. "Because life has made him tired. But you, my darling, you must never stop dreaming." She unfolded the crushed drawing from Alexei's fist, smoothing out the creases. "One day, we'll have a home just like this. Warm, safe, full of light." Tatiana sniffled, her eyes searching her mother's face. "Really?" Irina forced a smile. "Yes, I promise." Life in the Soviet Union was a rhythm of queues, shortages, and whispers. Irina stood in long lines for bread, her hands numb from the cold, while women around her traded rumors about who had been questioned by the KGB, or which neighbor had suddenly disappeared. Everyone knew not to ask too many questions. At home, she tried to keep a sense of normalcy for Tatiana. She read her stories, braided her hair in the mornings, and sang lullabies at night, even when her own spirit was worn thin. The little girl, bright and imaginative, loved fairy tales. She clung to the idea that heroes always appeared in the end, that even the darkest forests could be crossed. But Irina knew that in their world, heroes were scarce. Survival depended not on magic, but on silence. Each evening, as the sound of Alexei's boots echoed in the stairwell, Irina's heart tightened. Would tonight be calm? Or would the storm return? One Saturday morning, while Alexei was at work, Irina took Tatiana to Gorky Park. Snow glittered under the pale sun, and children slid down icy slopes on wooden sleds. For a while, laughter drowned out the heaviness of their lives. Tatiana's cheeks glowed red from the cold as she clutched her mother's hand. Mama, can we always come here? Just us two. Irina smiled, though her heart ached. Yes, whenever we can. As they walked, Irina felt a small spark of defiance. Maybe she could build small islands of happiness for her daughter, even in this sea of hardship. Maybe, despite everything, Tatiana could still grow up believing in kindness, in love. That night, when Alexei returned, he found them sitting together on the couch, whispering secrets and giggling softly. For a moment, he paused in the doorway, watching. Something in him flickered, an old memory, perhaps, of when life had not yet crushed him. But just as quickly, it was gone. He grunted, hung his coat, and sat heavily at the table. The fragile warmth of the day dissipated. The breaking point. Winter deepened. Coal rations grew scarce. Arguments at the factory made Alexei even more irritable. His anger at the state, at his own failures, at the unchanging grayness of their existence, all of it spilled over at home. One evening, when Tatiana accidentally spilled a cup of tea, Alexei's fury exploded. He shouted, his voice shaking the walls, his hands slamming against the table so hard the dishes rattled. Tatiana whimpered and hid behind her mother. Irina stood tall, her body shielding her daughter. No more, Alexei, she said, her voice breaking but resolute. If you cannot control yourself, then you will not come near her. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time, she did not back down. Alexei's face twisted with rage, then with something else, shock, perhaps, at her defiance. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but no words came. He stared at them for a long, tense moment, then turned and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't just fear, it was the beginning of change. Irina held Tatiana tightly. Her heart was pounding, but she whispered firmly, I will protect you. Whatever it takes. Tatiana's small voice trembled. Mama, are we safe now? Irina pressed her lips to her daughter's hair. One day, my love. One day we will be.